Before we can start with the conversation, just a robin round of how did all of us come from different perspectives of understanding law, advocacy, lived experience, as well as community public engagement with domestic violence. I want to know from everybody, how does protection of women at homes come forth in your work with this? Just a little intention setting, and I'll give you a minute to just go ahead with each of your answers, and then we can have a more detailed conversation. So we can start with you, Zaria.
Hi everyone, it's a lovely evening and thanks for being out here. So I have been survivor of domestic violence, also marital rape. Sorry, it's a bit overwhelming. I'm good. This happened to me when I was 20 years old. And I didn't think 20 years later I'd be sitting out here and talking about something so big and that it would be out there that there's something called marital rape. Anyhow, sorry, I'm actually in a very great place. It's been 20 years, but this has been a little overwhelming. So for me, I didn't know that there was a term like that, nor I knew there was something called domestic violence. I believe the Act came into existence in 2005. That was the year I got married, and I was very married for 9 months. And then I got pregnant, and I never went back. So the man I got married to was 7 years older to me, and I was heavily abused. And I came back to Bombay when I was 3 months pregnant, and I never went back. And post that, for 6 years, I fought for my son's custody, and thankfully I did get the custody. And after that, I had to apply for my son's passport, and the Indian law at that point didn't let you file for a passport if you were a single parent. And so because after I won his case, the first thing I wanted to do was to take him out to travel. But from the foreign ministry, I think they drove me insane. From 2013 to 2016, I spent, I think probably like 100 times going to the passport office. And then finally I signed a petition online where there's this website called change.org where I had addressed to Sushma Swaraj ji in 2016 that why is it so important for a man to have a signature when the person, the prime caregiver is me, financially, mentally and emotionally. And that petition went viral, and I had way too many signatures. And then I remember I was traveling in India, and I got a call from the ministry saying that please come to Bombay and to the passport office. We'll give you your son's passport. So when I went to the ministry, when I went to the passport office, I think in 3 years, it was the first time I didn't have to introduce myself. They were like, oh, Miss Patni, aapki hi ministry mein charcha ho rahi thi. Take the annexure C and please sign it. So when I read the annexure C actually says every word from my petition, where it says that I've been divorced, my ex has visitation rights, and where a parent who has the primary custody is who can get the passport. So it was, honestly, it's been too many years, but it was such a turmoil just to get his passport, and that's when I was like, I need to do this. And post that, I got Muhammad's passport, and now single parents can make the passport with obviously paperwork. And now every time someone needs to make a passport for a single parent, the person's name that pops up is mine. So for me to just go ahead and do this is like a joyful job, because I just feel like someone needs to hear someone in trouble, trauma, because if we don't hear, because I felt like 20 years back, something like divorce, domestic violence, any of this you couldn't speak about it. So I had to put myself in a box, and since 10 years, I'm out of the box now. So thank you so much for hearing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Zaria. I think a journey for personal struggle has now translated into benefits for so many people, and I think a lot of kids are thanking you for letting them have their parents' name on the passport now.
Yes, that is. I've gotten a lot of children like who have access to internet saying that we couldn't travel, we couldn't apply for colleges because we don't know where our fathers are. So yeah.
Thank you so much for doing that. That's incredible. Taking from Zaria and moving on to Advocate Napanai, would you please tell us a little more about how are you connected to the cause and what brings you to the intention of this campaign?
I've actually lived the cause, so it didn't have to be just this. Unlike many of your stories that I've heard, maybe I come from a different kind of privileged background. I've never had to suffer discrimination either in my birth, maybe a reverse discrimination, because in my family they wanted girls. So I have 3 elder brothers because of that. And then had a great childhood, equal rights. Reverse discrimination actually was not allowed in our house. So even the boys weren't discriminated against. So we learnt about equality from a very young age. I've been very lucky to be married into a family also which respects women, the work they do, and they love the fact that I am an advocate. And what better support, right, than all of it. But I personally feel that you don't need a personal trauma or a story to contribute. You must believe, you must have your own passion, your faith, and I always say courage in your own convictions. We're not here to always speak about other people's convictions, right? So I have always lived by my convictions. My conviction said, this is what I would be fighting for. And I actually studied law. And this is something I've said to many, where many in my time used to say law was a default option. Oh, if you didn't get into engineering or medicine, well, if you still want a professional degree, go into law. That's very easy to get into. It wasn't that easy for us to get into. I still had to write my entrance exam, etc. So for me, law was not a default option. It was by choice. It was my passion. And I did law to practice criminal law. In my time, when you said 30 plus, it's actually 35 years of practice. And in 35 years back, for a woman to practice criminal law was not that easy. And I did it because I felt that's where my passion was, to fight for rights. It may sound very, fancy today, but it was actually a very simple dream of a young girl at that point of time. And in that journey, be it as a student or thereafter as a practitioner, we get to see a lot. Unfortunately, we see a lot of harm, hurt, angst, and you also hear alternate stories. And therefore you understand that when we speak about harms to women or softer targets, or today we are not really talking just about binary genders also, right? And we speak about harms that can impact other genders, you realize there are 2 sides to every story. But that does not mean that you're going to throw out one side of the story which may be a powerful story. Okay? It does not mean that merely because some people may abuse a provision intended to protect, you're going to take away the protection itself. The protection was there for a purpose. And that purpose still needs to be met, and guardrails will always be put out to ensure it is not abused. That's the approach which I'm hoping for when we speak about marital rape too. It's so sad that we are still living in the 17th century when this was a construct where they thought you are giving an irrevocable consent. What you mentioned, Supreet, earlier, when you walk across the altar, you're technically supposed to have given an irrevocable consent for the husband to do whatever they want with you. And that construct has been thrown out in the very country of its origin. But we Indians proudly wear it like an armor still, right? So we need to come out of the 17th century, we need to move forward, and I am an optimist. Okay, I'd like to end on that note by saying that, I understand systems may fail us. I understand systems can fall short. They can be abysmal. But if we don't, systems are meant for every single one of us. If we don't make it work for us, then who will? So let us all fight together as a collective whole and a cohesive whole, men and women, as one of the young boys mentioned earlier, right? And make sure that we succeed in this initiative.
Thank you so much for sharing those very, very kind words. It's important to bring back the idea that you don't have to suffer a story to be able to stand for what is right. And that needs to, I think, come from within, and that's what you bring through your profession. I'm very happy to have you on board and speak a little more about that. I'll go now to Supreet and have you the platform to share a little about how does this connect with your work, and how do we put intention here?
I think that's all I do, right? So, I mean, I've been talking for the last 1 hour. I shared my personal story with you. So, you know, that was the starting point where I realized that if I can be told that on the first day of my marriage that you need to change because girls have to compromise once they are married, I think my destiny of where I'm going to go with this conversation was already decided. It took me a long time to actually realize that probably, you know, it's time I put this in a more structured way where I can help people. So I kind of went ahead, educated myself on everything I could, and when we started Red Dot Foundation, I'm a certified counselor, and I was speaking to a lot of survivors, and while we were talking about sexual violence, I realized that sexual violence within the four walls of your home, where you're supposed to feel the safest, was probably one thing which nobody talks about, right? And nobody wants to look at it. Even women, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to accept it, right? Because we are taught endurance is the answer to washing your dirty linen inside your home. Don't bring it up. And okay, sorry. So I think we started this work consciously during COVID, when a lot of women reached out to us, and they were in small rooms, living with their partner 24/7, and they were facing a lot of wrath at the hand of those people who were frustrated. And I think that's when we realized we need to reach out to as many women as possible, because what was unsettling was that these women had no information on what did the law say and what was available to them as an answer and as a solution to a problem like that. And I think since then we have constantly built on it. And while yes, I agree, you don't have to go through something like that, to fight for it. You can be passionate about helping somebody else. I think a lot of it started for me because I was part of it, like Zaria was, and then, of course, the momentum just took it somewhere else.
For sharing with us, Supreet. That's quite important. And we're all, I think a lot of them, before we started the discussion, were discussing about how they're connected with Red Dot Foundation's work, and then that is what brought them to the campaign. I would now move on to Advocate Audrey. How were you connected with the cause, and would you share with us a little bit of your intention?
So firstly, I have to say that this is really beautiful, and it's so, I'm sure this campaign is going to make a lot of noise just by the intensity of how you feel when you're in this room. So thank you for doing that. I don't usually talk a lot about it because I'm a lawyer and I have to always fight for the cases that I represent. But really my connection to domestic violence was as a child of a victim of domestic violence. And I've seen domestic violence very closely in my own home. And the idea of domestic violence is there's an image that it's constantly happening, that you're constantly facing that abuse. But actually the bigger stress is the quiet time. And that as a child not knowing when it is going to erupt again, and constantly trying to be good, to be careful, to not do things which will result in another incident happening. And one can never tell when the incident will happen. And one can never tell what will cause the incident. So it's not, it could be you cooked a good meal and that could result in violence because you're trying to show off. Or if you didn't cook the meal and you don't care for anybody, and that could result in because 3 items were not on the table, and it could result in the food being flung. And sometimes it was verbal, and sometimes it was physical, and one could never tell what was happening. And so in fact, when my mother left home when I was all of 8, I was the youngest of 3 children, I heaved a sigh of relief. I was ready to face anything. I was ready to live without her, and I was very close to her. But just the fact that I did not have to experience this insecurity of when what would happen. And for me, her leaving was that at least she will be alive. I will have a mother who is alive, who will not die in one of these incidents that blow out. It was a difficult journey because I'm talking about way back. I mean, I'm 50 now, so it's really a long time. But at that time, whenever there was an incident and my father would throw us out of the house, we would be standing in the corridor, banging so that we can come in. And the neighbors would come out, they would peep, they would look. They themselves didn't have the vocabulary of helping or even saying a word to just help us. So we'd just be standing there hoping that his anger would calm down and he would take us in. So I think I come from a time where domestic violence was not a word. It was not spoken about, it was not discussed. But my mother was very brave, very, very brave. She walked out, she educated herself. She studied law only to represent victims, women and children, victims of domestic violence. And she started an NGO called Majlis. And I initially, when I was young, I wanted to do different things, so I did different things. But I was always very connected to Majlis, and I joined in 2007 when I also felt at a time where this organization needs to grow and to be bigger, because it's very difficult for NGOs to do this work. It's very tiring, it's very exhausting. I work with a team of women lawyers, and I can't tell you what it takes to every day show up and be there for other victims. Because otherwise it's just like this one story, but here this is our work every day. So I joined in 2007. I thought I'd stay for a bit, and it's 18 years now, I'm still here. But it's been a wonderful journey, because I think what we do at Majlis is so important. What we do every day is to tell women that we are here to support you, and that support has no definition. That support is anything that you want. Because yes, we are lawyers, and yes, we believe that you have a right, but when you want to access that right is your choice. So our work involves, firstly, the first step, even though it's 40 years from then, it's still to convince women that you can live a life free of violence. You can live a life with dignity, and you don't have to take this. And then when that light bulb starts is when she will ask you the next question. But where will I eat? Where will I stay? Where will my children go? Who will accept me? What will people say? And that is when you start unraveling and trying to support them one step at a time, one step at a time. So a lot of people think that everyone who comes to me goes straight to court. Of course not. I don't even think 5% of the women who come to Majlis reach court. It's those tentative baby steps, just knowing that there is somebody to support me. And I think that, that is what we want. We need more of, to believe, to trust, to walk that journey with them. And rights is a very distant, at least what you call quote unquote justice. I won that case, I lost that case. Those are all part of the journey. But that empowerment, that confidence that women get at that point of time, that's life-changing, and that is what all of us should do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I would really like to say on behalf of young female lawyers, Flavia ma'am has been one of the most encouraging pioneers in this field for us. So thank you to you and to your mom as well. We'll start with discussing a little bit of the questions that we have. I'll start with Advocate Napanayak here. This is going to be a little technical question, so please hold our hand while we go through it, because it's important to know what the law is asking you. It's important to know what are the conversations happening at the Honorable Supreme Court. There are a bunch of petitions challenging the marital rape exception under the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, formerly known as the Indian Penal Code. For those unfamiliar with the law, could you please explain what does this exception mean in practice today, and why are the petitioners arguing that it violates fundamental rights such as right to equality, dignity, life, and personal liberty under Article 15, 14, 19, and 21? Without making it a little legal heavy, we could just know where we are with the law right now.
Absolutely. I'll try to tell a story, but I'll keep it really short. So, you have a provision under the Indian Penal Code, Section 375, which set out what amounted to rape. Now, under that, an exception was included saying that if you are a woman above 18 years of age, I'm not going to say 15 here, because even when the legislation introduced 15 years of age, that was overruled by the court. Supreme Court intervened and said no, the minimum age of consent is 18 years, and therefore I'm sticking to 18. So if you're above the age of 18 years, then it can, and if it's a wife, so if you're a woman married to a person, and if the person committing this act of rape against you is your husband, then it does not amount to an offense under Section 375. This is the simple aspect of it. Now the sad part of it is when the Nirbhaya incident happened. Red Dot Foundation has its origins thereafter. In fact, when the Nirbhaya incident happened, the Justice Verma Committee was appointed, and the Verma Committee clearly said that this exception should be done away with. It definitely stands against gender justice. And they also gave the additional aspects that should be added in. But you now have an exception which says, instead of removing it, you now have something which says sexual intercourse or any sexual act also committed by the husband are exempt. Why this addition was made is because certain acts which did not limit itself to what amounted to rape prior to the 2013 amendments also amounted to just per se sexual acts. You had certain cases which did not amount to typical ideas of rape, which I'm sorry to get so specific, but that's the definition of rape. It mandated penetration, right, to begin with. But then the law was changed to include different aspects of sexual violence into the rape definition. So instead of protecting us better, you now had the exception being made more wider to include not just sexual intercourse as you perceive it, but also sexual acts. Now what happens because of that is, now you had this case which has triggered the infinite sari, that dealt with an unnatural offense. It did not necessarily just deal with rape per se. But one, you had 377 which dealt with unnatural offenses being decriminalized, and there was a very clear rationale behind that for the Supreme Court, because it said you cannot criminalize consensual acts between two adults. So if there is a same-sex relationship, it is for them to decide what they want to do, and therefore it was decriminalized. Now today you have that same aspect being used against women, where particularly this Chhattisgarh High Court judgment, which is probably what has triggered this initiative, took this aspect to say that 375 exception means that you also cannot get into 377 where it is a non-consensual act also. So now you have this issue that one, a woman who is in a marital relationship is unable to ask for her right to say no. Now, the very foundation of this aspect of rape is consent. That I have not consented to a particular act, and therefore it is an offense against me as an individual. So this right which accrues to every woman, and it's a very gender specific provision. Unfortunately, even after the BNS, you still have it as a gender specific provision. Why I'm saying unfortunately is, for the first time you have the word transgender included in BNS, and yet you don't have the protection extending to transgenders. So it's still a male committing this offense against a female. So whilst this accrues to the benefit of unmarried women, when it comes to married women, you still don't have this right. And that's why today you have this fight before the Supreme Court, because the Karnataka High Court has come out with one of the most, I would say, forward-thinking judgment, which says this exception should be removed. It's inhuman, and it militates against gender justice. I'm simplifying it a lot naturally, and therefore the Karnataka High Court said that a man can be prosecuted for the offence of rape. Now, when that went before the Supreme Court stayed that order, and it is pending a hearing. Thereafter, you've had multiple high courts come up with multiple, opinions. Critical of them is from the Delhi High Court, which had a split verdict, where two judges, out of the two judges, one judge said marital rape exception should be done away with and it should be criminalized, and the other felt it may impact the family fabric.
That I really want to ask you about a little later as well, but thank you for summarizing to us the judicial journey of this question that we're trying to ask. Another perspective, I think, Advocate Audrey, I would like to ask you from the conversations that we've had beyond the panel discussion as well. I know that you work extensively on the Prevention of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. I reckon that it recognizes sexual violence within marriage under its definition of cruelty, while criminal law continues to exclude it as an offense, like Napanai had just said. What are the implications of having two different legal approaches addressing the same underlying harm, and how does this affect a survivor who's looking for justice? Now, there are two approaches entirely in front of them, so a little light on that.
Okay, I've really had a lot of conversations with Supreet on this issue, and I'm going to try and answer that. But before that, I really want to say that 26th January was yesterday, day before yesterday. I'm a great believer in our Constitution. I love our Constitution. I think it's one of the best constitutions in the world, and it was drafted by somebody who was such a visionary, and it has everything for everyone, and it is so far visionary that even though the crisis that we are facing in our country on multiple levels, you can still go back to the Constitution and find answers. So firstly, to this audience, I want to say that every right that we get is from our Constitution. Everything else that comes from it has to match the Constitution. You cannot, for example, one of our basic rights is a right to live a life free of violence. It's as fundamental as that. And if anyone is facing violence, the Constitution does not allow it. So then coming back to, if the Constitution is up there and is giving us a right to live a life free of violence, how can we say that it's okay to be raped by your husband and that's allowed? I mean, there's something fundamentally wrong with that, right? So my statement to you is no, marital rape is not permitted in our country. And it would be wrong for us to even say that sentence as supporters of women's rights, because we're giving a wrong message. No, marital rape is not permitted, and if any woman today wants to do something about it, we can definitely go to court and get her rights. Now, you can argue with me to say that, but there is an exception in 376, and I will agree with you. But we also have a section called 498A, which very clearly says and talks about cruelty to wives. Now, understand this, that cruelty to wives is a very broad definition, and what it says is it can be physical or mental. in 1983, when this section came into the CRPC, we didn't have the words, we didn't have the vocabulary, so we kind of summarized it into two buckets.